The middle bedroom at the end of my hallway had been padlocked from the outside for over a decade. A constant physical reminder of the night. A massive electrical fire swept through our apartment and supposedly claimed the life of my younger sister. I inherited the property after our parents passed away from grief-related illnesses. And for the first few months, the absolute silence of the building offered a strange kind of comfort after years of sterile hospital waiting rooms. Everything changed on a cold Tuesday winter night when the old mechanical grandfather clock struck exactly 2:15 in the morning, and the heavy silence was shattered by the unmistakable, clunky sound of our old upright piano playing a distorted, repetitive melody from right inside that sealed room. My hands shook as I stood in the dark hallway staring at the rusted padlock, knowing perfectly well that the room was entirely empty and that no musical instrument should be functioning after years of severe soot and smoke damage. The next night, at the exact same minute, the melody began again with a heavier, more aggressive tempo, accompanied by the distinct sound of fingernails dragging roughly against the inside of the wooden door frame. I tried to convince myself it was a neighborhood teenager playing a cruel prank from the fire escape. But when I inspected the exterior window the next morning, I found fresh, soot-stained boot prints leading straight up the brick wall and disappearing right into the cracked frame of the middle room. The physical evidence escalated the following evening when I discovered a trail of wet, black ash smeared across my kitchen floor, leading from the hallway directly to the edge of my own bed while I was sleeping. Terrified by this concrete breach of my security, I spent the entire next day installing heavy deadbolts on my front door and checking every window latch. Yet the terrifying melody resumed at 2:15 with an unbearable, pounding force that rattled the drywall. As the piano keys slammed down in that locked room, I heard the heavy metallic click of the padlock outside the door being slowly turned, followed by the sound of someone heavy dragging their feet across the floorboards right toward my bedroom. I locked myself in my closet and listened to the slow, deliberate scraping sound of something metallic scratching against the wood of my closet door for 3 agonizing hours until the sun finally rose. When I finally gathered the courage to step out into the daylight, I found a deeply etched message on my closet door that read, "You forgot to unlock it," written with charred pieces of wood that still smelled faintly of old smoke. The psychological torment turned into an immediate physical threat when I went to cook breakfast and found every single knife missing from the kitchen block, only to find them later jammed aggressively into the floorboards outside the middle room. I knew I had to pack my bags and abandon the apartment forever. But when I tried to turn the front door handle, I realized someone had jammed the mechanism from the outside with thick, melted plastic and copper wiring. Trapped inside the apartment with no working phone signal and no way to signal the street below through the reinforced security glass, I realized I was completely at the mercy of whatever was living in the walls. The afternoon dragged on with an oppressive weight as I heard constant, rhythmic thumping sounds coming from inside the ceiling vents, as if someone was crawling through the narrow metal shafts directly above my head. At dusk, a heavy object was dropped down the chimney flue, crashing into the living room fireplace with a loud bang that made me jump back in absolute terror. I approached the hearth with a flashlight and found a severely scorched, half-melted silver locket that I instantly recognized as the one my sister wore on the night of the tragedy. Inside the locket, the family photograph had been systematically scratched out with a sharp blade, leaving only my own face perfectly intact under a dark red stain. The realization that someone was actively hunting me inside my own home drove me into a state of hypervigilance, and I armed myself with a heavy iron fire poker as the darkness filled the rooms. By 2:00 in the morning, the temperature inside the apartment dropped so rapidly that my breath formed thick white clouds in the air, even though the central heating unit was clanking at maximum capacity. I stood in the center of the hallway with my weapon raised, watching the minute hand of my watch tick closer and closer to the dreaded hour of the incident. When the watch face finally changed to 2:15, the piano did not play this time. Instead, the heavy brass padlock on the middle room door violently snapped open and fell to the floor with a deafening metallic clang. The rusted hinges groaned loudly as the door slowly swung inward, revealing a dark, cavernous space that smelled overwhelmingly of kerosene and stale ash. A heavy, scraping sound emerged from the darkness as a tall, heavily bandaged figure, holding a long kitchen knife, stepped into the faint light of the hallway. The figure stepped closer into the dim light of the hallway, and as the loose fabric slipped from its face, I stared into the horrific, severely melted features of a person who had survived a catastrophic fire without any medical attention. The twisted mass of scar tissue and the empty, unblinking glare belonged entirely to my sister, who had not died in that room a decade ago, but had been secretly kept alive by our deeply ashamed parents in a hidden cellar beneath the floorboards. She raised the heavy kitchen knife with a trembling, scarred hand, her breathing sounding like a broken bellows. As she pointed the blade directly at my throat with absolute, murderous intent, I tried to back away toward the living room, but my heel caught on the edge of the rug, sending me crashing hard onto the floorboards, while the iron poker clattered uselessly out of my reach. She didn't rush toward me. Instead, she dragged her deformed left leg forward with agonizing slowness, ensuring that every second of my terror was fully prolonged as she trapped me against the brick wall. She dropped a heavy, rusted iron key onto my lap, the sight of that specific key instantly unlocked a flood of repressed memories from that horrific night when the flames first erupted. I suddenly remembered the blinding smoke, the deafening roar of the fire, and the absolute panic that seized my teenage mind as I ran down the burning hallway to save myself. My sister had been screaming my name from inside that very room, begging me to help her turn the stiff brass handle that had become jammed by the intense, blistering heat. Instead of finding a tool to pry the door open, my young mind completely snapped under the pressure of survival, and I had deliberately turned the heavy outside padlock to stop her from opening the door and letting the fire pursue me. I had locked my own little sister inside a burning furnace out of pure, cowardly self-preservation. And then my mind had completely buried the monstrous guilt by inventing the lie that she died before I could reach her. Our parents had discovered her barely breathing body in the aftermath, and to protect the family name from an unspeakable public scandal, they had hidden her away in the darkness while letting me believe she was gone. Now she stood over me as a living monument to my own unforgivable crime, her scarred fingers tightening around the handle of the knife as she prepared to exact her long-awaited revenge. I didn't even try to struggle or reach for a weapon anymore, because the crushing weight of the truth completely paralyzed my body and stripped away any desire to fight for my miserable life. She knelt down beside me, the heat radiating from her scarred skin, feeling like the very flames I had abandoned her to endure so many years ago. She pressed the cold edge of the blade against my cheek, forcing me to look directly into her ruined eyes so that I could witness the depth of the agony I had inflicted upon her. With a sudden, violent movement, she didn't slash my throat. Instead, she grabbed my arm and dragged me roughly across the floorboards into the pitch-black center of the middle bedroom. She slammed the heavy wooden door shut behind us, and the sharp sound of the outside padlock clicking back into place echoed through the dark room like a final death sentence. I heard her heavy, scraping footsteps walk away down the hallway, leaving me completely alone in the absolute darkness of the very room where her life had been destroyed. A few minutes later, the unmistakable smell of gasoline began to seep underneath the door crack, accompanied by the distinct scratching sound of a match being struck in the hallway. The orange glow of a roaring fire quickly illuminated the edges of the door frame, and I realized with absolute horror that she was setting the entire apartment complex ablaze from the outside. I threw my body against the heavy wood, screaming for mercy and pounding my fists until my knuckles bled. But the door remained completely immovable under the strength of the heavy padlock. The heat inside the room began to rise exponentially, blistering my skin and filling my lungs with thick, toxic black smoke that made it impossible to breathe or see. As the ceiling beams began to crack and collapse around me, I finally understood the true agonizing depth of the terror my sister had experienced because of my ultimate betrayal, I collapsed onto the burning floorboards, fully accepting that my agonizing end in this dark room was the only true justice for the monster I had become. One last question. If you were in her place at that moment, would you have done the same? Be honest. What does her choice deserve out of 10? Subscribe now. The best story is coming next.